Okay, here we go. Uh, I'm back for the third and final installment of my series on near-term human extinction. This is the third part of this series, and it will be my last video for a while. I'll talk more about that at the end. So this is third part. The first part was uh, what is extinction, and we should understand our terms here and how extinctions happen and how many have happened in the past and why they happened, so that we have an understanding that that this is not, you know there's no biblical context for this is science, the science of extinction. There is such a thing. Well, and the second part, I talked about why are people talking about this, and it's hard to know why anybody thinks or says anything that they do, but there are sound reasons why people might be having these concerns, this existential dread. uh, and so I addressed some of that. Again, level setting, right? It's like, why are we having this conversation right now? Is there a good reason to worry and fuss about near-term human extinction, or is it all just a fiction and a hoax, and people getting wound up about things? And yeah, there's a basis for it. There is. It's undeniable. But I don't think it's likely. And in this installment, I'll be able to demonstrate why I don't think it's likely. Something else, though, is likely. It's not extinction, so it just isn't. Extinction means there are none of us left, and so if there's some of us left, then we didn't go extinct. That's just how it is, right? So, but we can have what's called a die-off, and a die-off can leave you with very small numbers of individuals. Uh, Enough to reproduce, enough to carry on, and maybe even enough to start the whole fandango all over again. And in part one, I alluded to the fact that humans have done this before. Humans have had a brush with extinction at least once, maybe even more than once. We really don't know. All we have is evidence for the last time we almost went extinct. We can't have evidence for prior times when we may have already almost gone extinct. We can only have evidence for the last time, because the evidence is drawn from our DNA. So go watch part one if you're worried about that or interested in that. And today I want to talk about how might humans go extinct. Even though I don't really think that's a thing, I'll be able to tell you at the very end why I don't think it's a thing, because my only qualms with the idea of near-term human extinction is that I don't think we go to zero. So there you go. And if that's good enough for you, then you can leave now. Also, in fairness, if this is a difficult topic for you, because we're getting into the weeds here, okay, we're actually getting out there. Everything else was somewhat scholastic and scholarly, but this is now the nightmare fuel for some people. So if that bothers you, then don't go there. You don't have to do this. You don't have to listen to this. You don't have to pay any attention to it. When people come along and tell you, oh, near-term human extinction, it's a terrible thing, you don't have to listen to them. You may even think they're right, but you don't have to listen to them. You don't have to worry about it. Maybe you should, but remember, extinction is all of us. It's not you. It's not me. It's not even you and I. It's everyone. So what can you do about that? And can you even survive that? And you're not required to figure that out. You're just not. So coming here and listening to me talk about how is it that humans actually go extinct, what do you get out of that? Now there is a call to action here, and I guess I can say it now. There is a call to action here that we should now, starting today, well, actually starting 70 years ago, but setting that aside, that didn't happen. There's no better time than the present. Isn't that what they say? There's no better time than the present to start the process of avoiding human extinction. And hey, in the process of humans not going extinct, maybe other organisms that we know and love also won't go extinct. We're large mammals. We have a very specific habitat requirement. We're not the only ones, with specific habitat requirements. We're not the only ones that are going to lose our habitat and not be able to survive on the planet in the case of extinction. So will the elephants and the giraffes and the zebras and the wombats and the mongooses and the tapirs and the rabbits and squirrels and pigeons and all of it, right? However far you want to go. We're talking about everything that you can name. I tell my wife this all the time. The sixth mass extinction means the implications of not stopping the sixth mass extinction is that every animal you can name, from every David Attenborough documentary you ever saw, or Jacques Cousteau undersea adventure you ever saw, every animal you can name from all those things and all your education, and every time you went to the zoo, and every time you saw a poster, and anything, any kind of animal you've ever learned about that you could name or point to or describe, sometime during the course of the sixth mass extinction, every one of those animals is going extinct, just by probabilities. Because the organisms most of us know are the large, charismatic, as we call them, megafauna, the large animals that populate people's understanding of wildlife. Those are all doomed. Penguins, Galapagos tortoises, hummingbirds, California condors, pigeons, all of them. Everything you can name, you can sit down with a piece of paper and just list out the names of every single animal that you could think of. And nearly every single one of those is about to go extinct in the course of the sixth mass extinction. And of course, somewhere in that list ought to be humans, right? And if you wanted to list all the individual types of humans, right? Asians, Africans, South Americans, right? Europeans, Icelanders, yeah, all those are on the list if you wanted to get that specific. So yeah, that's the situation. Sixth mass extinction, and humans could get swept up in it. But in addition to, we're changing the earth and we're driving all these other animals to extinction, and we could be driven to extinction, we have our own peculiar vulnerability apart from all those animals. And I could even imagine a scenario where all those other animals don't go extinct, but humans do. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. What is specific to humans that we are now at risk of extinction? Because that's a thing. Not making it up. There's science behind the concern, the idea, the notion that humans could go extinct. There is science behind that. This is not Mad Max Thunderdome. This isn't some Disney movie. This isn't far-fetched Hollywood stuff. There's real science behind this. We could go extinct. And I'm just about to tell you how that happens. And I'm not going to pull any punches. You're going to come away from this really worried. I mean, if you're sane, you're going to come away from this worried. But we don't have to do this. If you're worried enough, you may want to start thinking about ways we can avoid this. But can you? I don't know. Maybe all you can do is stand by helplessly and watch. Somewhere in this narrative that I'm about to share, there will be things that maybe you could do. Maybe not. I don't know. This is the problem with extinction. And of course, on the bright side, I mean, if you need a bright side, if you need a positive outcome, maybe some few of us do survive, and those few get to start over, like the last time this happened to us. It did happen before, at least once, maybe even more than once. We just don't know. We know it happened once. And the evidence for that would actually obscure evidence of earlier events of near-term human near extinction. So who knows? Maybe we're just about to do this again. And in the process of doing this again, maybe it resets the clock, right? We just start over again. Yet again, we start over. Just like the last time and however many times it was before that. And it's good to start over sometimes, right? So maybe that's our fate. I don't know. I can't say, really. I think it might be. Take from that what you will. So let's talk about how people go about the process of going extinct. So as I like to do, I want to do some level setting here and just define some terms so that we're kind of all on the same page. I don't think, as I explained in the last video, I don't think that nuclear weapons are the way it happens. That nuclear weapons could happen. We could have a nuclear exchange, and that's would certainly, move the process along. But I don't think that's how it happens. I don't think we're going to have another terrible pandemic that kills half the human population, and that could happen, and that would be terrible. But I don't think that wouldn't do it. Uh, so how could it happen? Well, it could happen because we just don't have anywhere on this planet to live. We basically destroy all human habitat, and that would be bad because every organism, plants and animals, needs a habitat, and some habitat requirements are very specific. Human habitat requirements are fairly general. We're very flexible. We have large brains, and we live in groups, and sometimes living in groups makes it easier for you to figure things out. It certainly makes it harder to kill you if you're living in a group. Your tribe may be reduced in size, but so long as there's a mix of males and females of different ages, well, then you can make your group big again. So we have all these behaviors, including tool use and technology and large brains and collective activity, and of course we've domesticated fire, and we've domesticated animals, and we know how to make tools, and then we have a lot of characteristics that makes it easier for us to end up in small groups of people who can then carry on from there. But and that's because our habitat requirements are fairly generalized, fairly broad. There are people that live north of the Arctic Circle, right up in the ice and the snow. There are people that live in the deserts, and there are people that live in the at the equatorial regions that are really hot and have lots of rain and storms and whatnot. So obviously we're flexible. So the problem though is that habitat for modern humans and these I'm gonna try to stay out of the details of this. I'm just gonna say a lot of things, and if some of this confuses you, you just have to go back and watch my earlier videos, the earlier videos in this series, but also just some of my earlier videos. I've been talking about uh, the worked human habitat for years on that topic. So you know, I'm just going to assume that you get it, or that you're willing to accept my reasons for saying the things I do. And if you don't get it, you can research it. You can go to other channels and see what they have to offer. But the idea is that humans don't have a natural habitat anymore. There are some that do, but most humans now are living in a built or worked habitat, an artificial habitat. We are dependent, and part of that is because we're now living in large cities. We don't grow our own food. We don't. Most of us don't live in fault tolerant situations like villages or whatnot. Small uh, tribes. We live in urban areas. We become isolated. We tend not to help each other. We're now our habitat is fairly brittle, and it has lots of external inputs. So our water is imported from far away. Most of us don't even know where our water comes from, and we go to a tap and we turn it on. That's a lot of technology, and there's a whole string of things that have to happen for you to be able to turn the tap on and get cold water. And there's a whole nother set of things that have to happen so that you turn a different tap and get hot water. Uh, and there's a whole set of things that have to happen for you to be able to go down, even if you're just walking to a grocery store and buy the food. And there's a whole set of things that have to happen for you to have money to buy the food. And there's a whole set of things that had to happen that there was a grocery store at all in your neighborhood. And then after it was established and built in your neighborhood, then there was a whole nother set of ongoing things every single day have to happen for there to be food in that grocery store. Because that grocery store isn't, it's not a real food source. It's just a distribution point. The food is somewhere else, and you couldn't find it if you had to. You have no idea where your food's coming from. So we live in this fairly brittle artificial habitat where all these inputs are being coordinated for our benefit. And I'm going to call that modernity. And it's electricity and sewer treatment for when you flush the toilet, and of course food, water, Even your habitat was built for you. You didn't build this place out of locally available materials. This was all built, and you bought it, and you moved in, right? Everything is being done for you, and this is modernity. And you can't do these things for yourself. You're incapable of providing any of these things for yourself. You just can't. Maybe you could have 100 years ago, maybe even for some of us, 50 years ago. But by and large, generationally, it's been for most of us 5, 6, 8, 10 generations since we've been able to do any of these things. For most of us, we have no institutional knowledge, no collective understanding of how to do any of these things. And your habitat doesn't provide these things. If my water was coming from a well that was drilled in the ground, somewhere in town, then at least I could go to that well and figure out a way to get the water out for my own personal uses. Maybe it's not being pumped in pipes to my house. Maybe that's not working anymore, but at least I could go to the well, to the source. But is there a well? Or is your water coming from 80 or 100 miles away? Is there some water treatment plant where your water actually comes from? And it has to go through that plant. And there's all these complicated mechanisms and people that run the water purification and the water filtration and pump the water and fill the water mains. And maybe that's where your water comes from, a complicated factory 50 miles outside of town. You have no idea. I have no idea. I can't tell you. You can't figure it out. You'll never understand it. This is modernity. And most people happily live in their artificial habitat. Artificial habitat. A good way to think of it, and this helps expose the vulnerability, is a tiger living in a zoo. So the tiger still has its claws and teeth and its aggression. It can still feed itself, but it's living in a zoo. And it's not allowed out of the zoo, and it probably doesn't even want to get out of the zoo. And if it got out of the zoo, it'd find itself in an urban landscape. That's not going to work. So while the tiger is in the zoo in the middle of some cityscape, the tiger is totally dependent on humans doing things for it. It can't do anything for itself. The humans bring the fresh water every day or twice a day, and then they bring the food, and then they take away the tiger's excrement. And if the tiger gets sick, they give the tiger a veterinary treatment. The vet comes by and checks in on the tiger. And also, there are walls all around the tiger that protect the tiger from the humans, some of whom, would molest the tiger or even kill the tiger. They might kill the tiger just because tigers are really valuable on the open market for tiger parts. A tiger is worth $100,000 dead. Tigers are worth a lot more dead than alive. I mean, vastly more dead than alive. And so, someone could come by, and if the walls aren't high enough and the barbed wire isn't sharp enough, well, then someone will kill the tiger and take the tiger and sell the tiger on the market. So, the tiger is in big trouble if any of that stops. What if the zoo just shuts down? What if there's an earthquake or some calamity or a hurricane comes ashore and all the zookeepers have to leave? And then, who's going to bring the water? The tiger isn't stuck in a cage. Who's going to bring the water? Who's going to bring the food? Anybody? Nobody? What's the tiger going to do? He's stuck. He has no story about how he's going to survive this. And he'll be howling and he'll be roaring and he'll be doing all these things and he'll be upset and angry and frightened, and it won't matter. He's stuck. And doesn't matter how violent he feels towards people. It's just not going to do him any good because he's stuck. And that's his version of modernity. He didn't want to be there. He could have handled his life just fine if he was in a jungle, if he was in a forest, but he's not. He's stuck in an urban hellscape called modernity. And so are you. And so am I. And you don't know that, but I do know that. So I'm telling you that you're stuck in modernity and you have no narrative. You have no story you can tell yourself or anyone else about how you survive without modernity. All the stuff happening 24 hours a day. And the second thing you got to know is modernity is made possible only with the constant 24/7 consumption of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. And that's it. That's the two stories of your life right now, mostly. Now, if you're on the internet and you're listening to this video and you even came to this video because you're interested in the topic, then yeah, you're stuck in modernity, almost certainly. And even people that have farms, even farmers who have plant wheat and harvest the wheat and bag the wheat and send the wheat off to even those people, They also go into town and buy food. They buy a McDonald's hamburger and they come back with bacon and eggs and cheese and bread, and they don't use that wheat to do anything. They don't have a wheat mill. They're not baking bread from their own wheat. And even if they are making all this food, how well can you survive if all you have is wheat? Do they have a garden? Do they have animals? Do they do any of those things anymore? Do they have pigs and chickens and maybe they manage those things with all the money they're making from selling wheat? But what if they can't sell wheat? What if modernity collapses and nobody wants their, you know, 85 tons of wheat a year? Well, now how do they survive? They're stuck in modernity too. And if they have some land, maybe they have a small farm, they have, some chickens and goats and whatever, or they could acquire those things. So maybe they got a story, but they're surrounded by people, millions, billions of people who are stuck in modernity. And what happens if modernity fails in the nearby city or a nearby urban area? Then those people are going to find themselves surrounded by hungry, angry, frightened people. So even the farmers don't really have a story about what they're going to do in the failure of modernity. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about how modernity, which is dependent on fossil fuels, fails and drives humans to extinction. Because it might. It could. There's actually a story around how that happens. And the story in this case is speculative. What is not speculative, and I'm going to start with this, is the collapse of modernity. That is not speculation. That has to happen because of fossil fuels. This is what we call a wicked problem. Modernity is dependent on fossil fuels, but for everything. But our consumption of fossil fuels is changing the Earth dynamic system. In particular, in specific, it's making it get hotter. It's called global heating. And in order to save ourselves from global heating, which we would have to do for reasons I'm about to describe, we would have to stop burning fossil fuels. But if you stop burning fossil fuels, that's the end of modernity. So you don't stop burning fossil fuels. You keep burning fossil fuels, and that it keeps enhancing global heating, and it gets hotter. And pretty soon, modernity becomes fragile, brittle. There's too much heat. Well, there's not enough water. The crops are failing, and all these kinds of things. And pretty soon, you're thinking about, wow, we need to stop burning fossil fuels, but you can't because you're dependent on modernity. You see how this goes? It's a wicked problem. Your solution is as bad as the problem, and if you pursue your solution, you create new problems, and those problems need solutions. And your solutions that you have to fall back to solve your problem with survival, those solutions jeopardize your survival further, and there's no way out. There's no way out except through collapse. The way out is to collapse. And our solution to near-term human extinction is to stop burning fossil fuels. But the moment we do, we lose modernity, and therefore we pitch ourselves headfirst into near-term human extinction. But that doesn't matter. We have to stop burning fossil fuels, because if we don't, then the planet gets so hot that we pitch ourselves headfirst into near-term human extinction. So we stop burning fossil fuels, and that collapses modernity, pitching us headfirst into near-term human extinction. There's no way out. And you can think, oh, we'll innovate, we'll do this, we'll have green this and blue that and something else and wind farms and solar, and you can have that conversation with yourself. I'm not even going to address it. It's just bullshit. If it makes you happy, well, then pursue it. Think about it, talk about it, plan it with all your friends, and tell them, I was just listening to this wacky guy talking about near-term human extinction, and he refused to address innovation, and he refused to address greening the economy. And I got 5 minutes into his thing, and I had to turn him off. Well, actually, more like 23 minutes in, and I had to turn him off because he was a wacko. Because he wouldn't want to look at the real solutions. There aren't any. I've looked at them. I'm not a dummy. I'm a scientist and an engineer, and I've looked at all this crap, and I've said, well, it's interesting, but that's not going to work, or you're not doing that right now, or you don't have the money to do that. And no one's helping. There's a lot of talk, there's blather, or that's just impossible. That goes against the laws of physics and thermodynamics. Why would you even talk about that? And a lot of it is just blather. It meant to confuse people and help them to cope. It's just coping mechanisms. And hey, coping is good, right? If you're being pitched headfirst into near-term human extinction, yeah, you're going to need to cope, or you're going to lose your mind. You're going to lose faith. You're going to lose hope, whatever. And so coping, that's a thing. That's some sound psychological advice. Well, learn how to cope. Figure it out. talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your pastor, talk to your, your therapist, whatever. Learn how to cope. Coping is good. And maybe coping will help you see your way through this, or maybe coping will help you face your demise with, compassion and dignity. I don't know. You should leave here right now because I'm not going to put up with that. I'm going someplace else. I'm going towards near-term human extinction. So how does it happen? It starts with what exactly is happening today. Today is not. We're not having a nuclear war, and we're not having a novel pandemic showing up this week. Although there's one brewing. It's an influenza that could come along and kick our asses again. But right now that's not happening. And right now we're not at nuclear war. But what we are doing is we're suffering from global heating, which is caused by the consumption of fossil fuels. So here we are. We're already in the bind, and global heating is heating the planet. It's heating all parts of the planet, but not all parts equally. And because people live their lives differently in different regions of the planet, for example, the developed world, mostly in the north, is able to cope better with changing conditions than, say, the undeveloped south or the emerging south. So not everybody can respond in the same way. Not everybody has the same amount of cushioning with wealth and infrastructure. Not every region is heating in exactly the same way as the one next to it. But the process is global and it's heating. And we're already seeing uninhabitable conditions emerging in, almost everywhere, really, almost everywhere. If you're better able to cope, if you have a lot of money and a lot of infrastructure to support you, and you have a lot of food chain options, and there's a lot of food in your country, and you're highly automated, and you can grow a lot of food, and you kind of have all that sort of worked out, then even if you're having environmental catastrophes born out of global heating, you may not even notice. You may notice the change in the price. People may talk about your region is in a drought, or the water may get more expensive, or water may become scarce, but you're not worried about it because you live in a modern place with lots of options. So you'll have a different feeling about global heating than someone who doesn't live in your region, doesn't have your modernity level established. So what is happening now is that parts of this planet are becoming uninhabitable. That will proceed. Uninhabitable happens when it's too hot for human survival. It's too hot for animal survival. And even your plants will just wither. And they won't wither because you didn't have water for them, even if you have irrigation. It's simply too hot. Plants die just like humans die because it's too hot. They just can't survive. They shut down. They shut down. They quit. They cook. Plants can cook in the ground. Fruits can cook on the trees, and there's no longer food. The fruit cooked on the trees. The grapes cooked on the vines. It's not food anymore. And so you start having problems with supply chain issues. Global heating can lead to water shortages, either because the water is simply evaporating as fast as it can be rained in. That's a lot of regions get their water from the sky, and it fills in reservoirs and fills in streams and rivers. But if it's really hot, that water can evaporate or soak into the soil as fast as it can accumulate. So you can have droughts that are simply caused by global heating. It's still raining. The glaciers are still melting, but there's no water because you can't have water because it's too hot. And then your food supply crashes, and then people are dying in the streets because it's so hot, and because they have no water, and because they have no food. And now what's happening is that their habitat is failing them. They needed food inputs, they needed water inputs, they needed electricity, and all this stuff is failing them because it's so hot. And so they begin to die because they don't have habitat. That's what happens. If it's too hot and you can't cool yourself and you can't feed yourself and you can't hydrate, you die. And if a region is now having that problem, then everybody dies because they're all human and they're all living pretty much the same way. And even if there are wealthy people in this area, and I'm not naming countries, but I could name Pakistan, India, Southeast Asia, Australia, Mexico, the U.S. Southeast. I could name some specific things, but I don't have to, because eventually it just sweeps through the whole planet. It's global heating. Global heating. Get that into your head, all right? Every place is warming because it has to. It's global heating. the response patterns to the impact of global heating will vary, probably depending on income levels and infrastructure availability. But the fact that the globe is heating means everyone's going to have to deal with this however they can, if they can. So as nations begin to fail and groups of people begin to die, then the people in these areas that do have options, like they've got money, they leave. And you don't have to have a lot of money to get on a plane and fly out of India, or get on a boat and leave Southeast Asia and go to the Philippines. You don't need a lot of money. You just need some technology to work for you. And then you have all these fairly wealthy refugees moving into all these other countries if they can. We already see this at the U.S. southern border with Mexico. There's a lot of people coming into the U.S. at the U.S. border with Mexico who are not Mexicans. They're refugees from all over the world. And why are they coming to America? They're fleeing global heating. A lot of them. Their narrative about how they're going to survive where they are is just evaporated. They can't figure it out anymore, and they leave. They have money, and they leave. And these are and the reason they have money is that they are the teachers in their country or their region. They are the doctors, the lawyers, the politicians. They had money, but it didn't help. All the money helped them to do was escape. And so this is how it starts, and it's already starting right now. Right now. Not making this up. This isn't even science fiction or fantasy. It's happening right now. It's already started. And because it started, it never stops. And every region takes its turn. And every region throws its people into the world. Get out of here. Leave. If you don't leave, you're going to die. And so they leave. And they become refugees. And they look like refugees. And they have all their clothes on their back. And the little kids are dirty. And the baby's crying. But they've got money. They're the wealthy people of the place they used to live. And they fled. They got on an airplane and they flew to Mexico. And now they're trying to cross the border into America because they've got family or friends or a child of theirs is going to a university in America. And they got an in. They got a hook, and they're coming to America because they're fleeing the destruction of their region, their country, their city, their town by global heating. And it just proceeds from there. And it never stops because it can't. Because you can't stop burning fossil fuels. Nobody can. In fact, they're coming to America, or they're coming to Europe, or they're coming to China to burn more fossil fuels. I mean, they've got money. They expect to pick up their life where they left off. And they're going to have a car, and they're going to have a job, and they're going to go to Disneyland just like everybody else does. And they're going to spend money, and they're going to have money because they got a job, and they're going to buy fossil fuels. And they're going to use electricity and the internet and everything they used to do in their own country. Now they're going to do it here. They're not going to stop doing it. They're coming here to do what they used to do. And if they've got a PhD in medicine or an MD, they're an MD, or they got a PhD in physics, then they're just going to work in a university, or they're going to set up practice. They're just going to start over. But they came here because they couldn't stay there, wherever there was. And this process is already racing out of control. And you don't have to believe that. Wait and see. You're going to find out it's true. It's in the media. You hear coverage of it through certain media streams, and our media doesn't cover it because it's scary, and we don't want to have to touch it. We don't want to have to deal with it. We certainly don't want to have to stop burning fossil fuels because modernity. So we just kind of sweep it under the rug and hope it goes away. But it can't go away. It can never go away because global heating never goes away. And you can stop burning fossil fuels, I mean, in some parallel universe, but the heating level of today doesn't go away. It just maybe doesn't get as hot as it would have, but it doesn't go away. And maybe it continues to get hot. It might continue to get hot for decades after we stop burning fossil fuels. But we're not stopping to burn fossil fuels because of modernity. So this whole process just races on and on and on. And pretty soon, the entire equatorial region, the entire global south becomes uninhabitable. And those people push north. They could push south, but there isn't any land in the south of the planet, southern hemisphere of the planet. There's just a little bit of Africa, and there's Australia, and there's a little bit of South America. There is the Antarctic continent, but it's covered in ice. And even if the ice all melts, it'll just be rock under the ice. There's no soil. You can't live there. You couldn't do anything there. Maybe in 10 million years, there will be soil development, and there'll be forests and trees, and who knows what develops on that continent over 10 million years. But hey, we don't have 10 million years. 10 million years, we'll be 10 million years extinct. So, there will be people that go south, but they're going to find that there isn't much land down there, and the people down there are just not going to welcome them. So they're going to go north, and that means Europe, China, Russia, America, Canada, Mexico, and these countries will come under increasing pressure. There's going to be more people showing up, demanding more infrastructure, more modernity. They're fleeing the collapse of artificial habitat, and they're trying to get to functioning artificial habitat, like any tiger would try to find another place where there's food and water. Tiger in a zoo needs artificial habitat. So if where you are isn't working, you'd have to find another one. How are you going to do that in a zoo? It's going to be very difficult. And how are you going to do that as a human? It's going to be very difficult. Leaving your country and millions of you leaving your country all at once, trying to get into other countries is just going to be very difficult. These people become refugees. Some of them will die on the border. Some of them will be within stone's throw of their destination, of the next place where they could live, called modernity. They'll be within stone's throw of it, and they'll die anyway, thwarted in their dream to escape global heating. And many of them will just die on the road. They'll get close to their escape, and it just won't happen for them, and they'll perish. And as humans flee the effects of global heating and the collapse of modernity, and as they move north, they bring their problems with them, and they exacerbate the problems of trying to support modernity with increasing global heating when there's all these refugees. And pretty soon, the infrastructure that maybe could have, let's just take the US as an example, we're sort of kind of able to support about 300 million people in the US. Our infrastructure is pretty good as it goes, but it's also kind of old. And there are lots of places in the US that are having problems, even without global heating. And then when you throw global heating on top, including all of the manifestations of global heating, like severe weather, hurricanes, droughts, crop failures, when you throw all that in, and as global heating increases, those things get worse in turn. Then even the US starts to have a difficulty maintaining this narrative about modernity. And, the number of people who can live in the US might actually start to decrease. The number of people who can live with a sense of continued modernity, that they have the water, they have the electricity, they can go to the market, the food is there. The number of people in the US who can continue with that story starts to decrease. And maybe it's not 300 million anymore. Maybe it's 100 million. Maybe it's 80 million Americans that can actually claim that they're doing okay with modernity. And and as global heating increases, and as the influx of refugees increases, and as the collapse of infrastructure and food chains and whatnot, all the supply chains proceeds apace, everybody starts to have to move around. And America is a big country, Russia is a big country, Europe is a big region, and you can move around a lot horizontally, one state to the other, one town to the other, leaving the coasts, going inland. You can do a certain amount of that, but at some point, you have to abandon ship. You just have to say, this isn't working. Now there's 600 million people living in the US. Where did all these people come from? Well, they're refugees from every other place, and they just got into the country, and some of them got in legitimately. They were doctors, nurses, lawyers, teachers. They came to America to live, but there was 300 million of them because, there's 3 billion people that live in the earliest affected areas near the equator. And so out of 300 billion people, 300 million of them came to the US. Out of 3,000 million people, 300 million came to the US. That's 10%. That means that 10% of the affected people, which is about 3 billion, 10% of the affected people came to the US. You think that's impossible? That's only 10%. Where do the other 90% go? Well, some maybe 10% go to Europe, maybe a few percent go to China, maybe a tiny percent, go to Mexico, and a few to Canada, and eventually, the rest of them just die. Maybe they die en route, but we still end up with 300 million people. That's 10% of the global South, and that's ours. We have to take care of those people now. So that's 600 million people living in the U.S. 300 million that were here originally, and another 300 million that came from the collapse of the global South. And so now 600 million people suddenly, and this suddenly could happen over 10 years or maybe even less, possibly less. 600 million people trying to experience modernity in a collapsing system that is being affected by global heating because everyone is, because it's global. And so now you have problems internally in all these countries and all these places. Europe is torn to pieces by all these refugees. You know, uh, America is torn to pieces politically and economically by all these refugees, but you couldn't keep them out because they had legitimate reasons for being here because they had money and they were just trying to flee, and they didn't even come over the border. They came in on a jet plane and they landed and they went through customs and they showed their visa and they have a business already in California. They have a second home in Vancouver, whatever. And they just come here and they just pick up where they left off because they're rich. This is the rich people from the global south. They all came to America and we welcomed them because they were rich. And we wanted rich people in modernity because we want them to pay taxes and support our industries and buy our goods and eat the Big Macs and drink the Pepsis. And why wouldn't we want them here? They've got money. Of course we let them in. Bring us your money. Okay. And so they came here. 300 million of them show up and they've all got money. And they all buy the housing and they all eat the Big Macs and they all buy the Teslas and they're all driving around and they're doctors and nurses and they're now living in America because they have money. And why not? Why would we not bring them in here with their money? Of course, we're going to bring them in here with their money. They're not poor people trying to sneak through the border. They came in on a jet plane with a visa and they've already got a business. Why wouldn't we let them in? So now we're 600 million Americans. And what's our story? And this is happening all over the world. And some people try to sneak into countries. Some people try to get on a boat and land on a beach. And a lot of people die and no one knows what happened to them. And, but it's just so hot, they can't stay. And then it starts getting hot in the new places. Global heating. It's global. Maybe it starts at the equator, but it just works its way up. And I'm talking about the northern hemisphere because, again, there really is no southern hemisphere for human habitat. The lowest part of Africa and the very tip of South America, which is desert, it's Patagonia, right? Tierra del Fuego. I mean, there's no story of humans living in these places. They'll go there to die. Specifically, they'll go there to die. That'll be their outcome. So the ones that don't go anywhere to die, they go someplace to live, and that means they're in the global north. And so pretty soon, the pressure is on everybody to move further north. And then Canada is dealing with refugees, American refugees, okay? Again, wealthy white people who have degrees and have businesses and, have nice cars and nice homes, and they abandon all that and they move into Canada. They say, hey, wow, it's getting hot down there. There's so many people and the infrastructure is falling apart. And the Canadians, because they're polite and, and again, they'll take the money. They say, oh, okay, good enough. Hey, buddy. And so you move into Canada, and then all of a sudden, a good part of 600 million people living in North America start to stream into Canada. And Canada is far less likely to be able to accommodate a lot of people than America is, or Europe, or the south part of Russia, because there's not a lot of agriculture above a certain point because it's always been cold up there. But now with global heating, it's not so cold. It's more temperate, but it's full of trees, and the trees are burning all the time because, they're not accustomed to this kind of warmth. So the trees die, the forests die, the boreal forest, which is a cold, drought tolerant forest. It just catches on fire and burns. And there's enormous fires all the time in the boreal forest of both Canada and Russia. And so all the time that people are trying to get out of these heating regimes and this collapse of modernity, they're going into these areas that are underpopulated, don't have a lot of agricultural land, and are on fire. And how's that supposed to work? It's not going to work. It's just not going to. People are going to die. And at this point, we may be looking at massive running gun battles. All those people bought a bunch of AR-15s. Well, now you get to put them to use because you're surrounded by so many people and there's so much demand for infrastructure and there's so much animosity and so much grievance that, they'll just break. They won't put up with it. And there'll be war, and it'll be civil war. It wouldn't even be one country against another, although that could happen too. It's possible that the Canadians set up their military forces at the border. And if you try to come into Canada at the US-Canadian border, they shoot you. And if you fly into Canada and you try to stay, they drag you out of your hotel room and they send you back to the border. And if you fight them about it, they shoot you because they're really worried. They're trying to survive. And so at this point in Europe, in America, North America, at all the borders, there could be massive, massive combat, just flat out warfare, because everyone is understanding that the modernity is collapsing. And they're seeing what they have, and they know they can't share it because they saw what happened already when the last wave of refugees showed up in the vestiges of modernity. And meanwhile, all of this is happening. The forests are on fire. The agricultural systems are being abandoned. The food chains break down. The heat waves are destroying crops. The heat waves are causing droughts. The heat waves are causing huge swathes of mortality in plants, animals, and humans. Not that humans aren't animals. Massive amounts of mortality, which leads to massive consequences of disease. Plagues of every kind. Even things like bubonic plague will come back, and typhus and diphtheria and all the terrible things. Malaria, as the heat increases and moves north, then all the diseases, especially the aquatic diseases of the equatorial regions, begin to move north. They're already getting malaria in Florida. It won't be long before you have malarial parasites coming out of, Michigan. And so you have diseases, you have collapse of food chains, you have internal strife and conflict, running gun battles, civil wars, genocides, suicides, everything else going on. And people just begin to move slowly north, trying to escape this. And it's really, at this point, it's the absolute annihilation of modernity, because it just can't keep going. No one's going to be working at the water treatment plant, taking the water from the reservoir and purifying it and pumping it into the water main so that I can turn my tap on. Those guys are going to leave. They've got families. They got their own problems with modernity. So they're going to load up the kids and the dog, and they're going to jump in the station wagon, and they're going to head north, and they're not going to be working at the water treatment plant. And so when I go to my tap and I turn my tap on, and for some reason I'm still here, and I turn my tap on, no water comes out. I'm done. I have to get it. I get the wife and the kids and the dog, and we load up in our station wagon and we head north. And that's just how it's going to be. And if there's nuclear power plants and the workers, they don't have a story about where their food and water and shelter is coming from, then they don't stay here. They leave. And maybe they shut down the nuclear plant on the way out the door, last one out, turn off the lights. Maybe they don't. Maybe they figure someone else is going to shut it off, so they don't. So, eventually, lack of maintenance, there's a problem. Again, it's really hot. Who knows what that's going to do? Then the nuclear power plant, fails. And the coal-fired power plant, and the natural gas-fired power plant, and the solar farms, and the wind farms, and all these things require maintenance. They require people to be there to make sure that it keeps running, and to, pull the levers and push the buttons and all this kind of stuff. But they're leaving, because modernity is collapsing. So they leave, and they just leave these things. And if you're left behind, pretty soon you find yourself with no water, no electricity, no food, no anything. And if that's your story, then you want to go fill your station wagon up with gasoline. You go to the service station and there's no gas because there was no one to deliver the fuel, and there's no electricity at the gas station anyway. And so you can't fill your car up with gas. And even if you have already filled it up and you're going to go up the road, you may go your 300 miles before you need to fill up. And that service station may also be closed. And now you're done. You're stopped. You pull your car off the road, and you and the family and the dog get out of the car and you start walking, because modernity failed. And so everyone's doing the same thing. They're trying to get out. They're the tiger trying to get out of the zoo. How does that work? And who manages to do that? And pretty soon, it doesn't matter how much money you have. Maybe the early escapees from their collapse had enough money and enough prestige and enough influence that when they came to their new country or their new situation, they could start over and reestablish themselves. But 5, 6, 8 years later, they got swept up in the next round of refugees. And as the further north you go, the less developed it is, because In the past, that was forest. It was cold. There was no agriculture, and there isn't any agriculture now. And so you're leaving behind the temperate regions that were the breadbasket of the world, that fed the world, like the US Midwest and Ukraine and the growing areas of Europe and the Mediterranean. And you're leaving all that behind because it's gotten too hot. And there's too many people because people have had to flee their own situation to come to be part of yours. And so everything starts to break down. Everyone's fighting everyone else. People are terrified, angry, jealous, whatever their problem is, flying the flag upside down, shooting AR-15 into the air. It's going to be all those things and more, things we can't even imagine. There's going to be religious cults. There's going to be suicide cults. There's going to be, end of days cults. It's going to be everything, every kind of chaos, every kind of mental fatigue and mental illness. Everything is going to be out there on the stage. All of it working itself out. Every type of human abreaction, every type of human failure will be front and center in your grill all the time. You'll be surrounded by people who have left behind their entire life, and they're angry, and they're bittered, and they're terrified, and they're depressed, and they've lost all hope, and they've seen everything fall apart, and everyone around them has seen everything fall apart, and they're leaving, and they're fleeing, and they don't know where they're going, and they don't know how they're going to get there. Most of them won't, but some of them will. And when they arrive, they're going to realize, to their horror, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. It's forest, and the forest is on fire because this is the north. And it doesn't matter that the temperature is at least somewhat moderated by being so far north. It doesn't matter. There's no food. You left the food behind. The growing areas that fed the world, including the Canadians, including the Scandinavian countries, the food growing areas that we talk about so much now, are behind you. It's burned up in the sun. The fruit's burned up, cooked on the trees. It's done. You can't go back there. You'll never go back there. You won't go back there for 10 million years. And what you need to know is, at the top of the world is not land. It's water. The top of the world is water. A lot of it. It's the Arctic Ocean. At some point, you run out of land. And maybe the temperatures are okay, but the place you find yourself, it's all peat bogs and former permafrost, and you walk on the ground and it's just squishy and there's no soil. It's just 100 feet of peat material, and it's stinking and it's off-gassing and it's on fire a lot of the time, and there's methane coming out and hydrogen sulfide gas, and even the air is toxic to breathe with so much methane. The air burns from the methane releases because it got so hot so quickly. And here you are, you've gone to the top of the world, and you think there's more, but there isn't. You find yourself standing at the edge of the Arctic Ocean, knee deep in peat bog. And you're done. You're just done. And there's 10 million people behind you crowding up to the same place where you just had to stop because you're knee deep in ocean water. And you haven't seen agriculture land in 18 months of walking. You haven't seen a farm in 18 months of walking. Why are you even still alive? Probably because you've been killing other people and taking their food. And so as the number of people dwindles, the amount of food that they've been carrying with them stretches further. And so this is it. This is the die-off. Well, now we're now killing each other for food, clothing, and water. And of course, killing each other for weapons to go kill more people to get their food and water. And it's just, and everyone is bitter and everyone is terrified and everyone understands that this is just survival now. This is the tiger trying to claw his way out of his grotto, trying to find something to eat in the zoo, trying to get out of the zoo, eating everything in the zoo, the chimps and the dogs and the elephants and the rhinos, and just killing them and eating them, and just killing everything inside the zoo, and then finding the outer perimeter of the zoo, the high fence with the barbed wire on top, and scaling that, climbing that, just with raw power and anger and violence, climbing out of that zoo and just finding the first thing it can find and eating it. That's us at the end of modernity. That's us. We have to be that way. We just have to do everything we can to survive. And to me, I'll just say it right here. To me, that looks like cannibalism. I don't know that people are actually eating other people, but sure, why not? It's meat, it's food. If you find some bunch of people and they don't have food to feed you, you kill them and you eat them. That's what it looks like at the end of modernity. And that process, once people have adopted this idea that, well, there's so many people and they're all going to die anyway, and there's no food, there's no McDonald's, there's nothing to eat. And even the land that I have fled into on my northward migration, it's just forests and they're all on fire. And there's no agriculture land here. There's nothing to eat. You find blueberries growing in a meadow, you eat them all, and that's it. You won't have blueberries again for a year. And a year from now, you're going to be 50 miles further north looking for something else to eat. And you just keep clawing your way through it. And you're eating everything you can find, and you're fighting over everything you can find. And shoes and everything that wears out, you got to kill somebody to get their shoes. No one's making shoes. No one's sharing anything. You're just clawing your way like a tiger, terrified and angry. And you've had enough of this shit, and you're just going to devour your way through it. And at the end, after you were the one that survived, after you were the one that learned how to kill, after you were the one who suddenly understood what was really at stake, then you finally get all the way north. And about the time you think that this is as far as you're going to have to go, you're knee deep in a fucking ocean. Now what are you going to do? Turn around and go back? There's any number of millions of people waiting for someone to show up, headed back. They need your shoes. They need your gun and your ammunition. They need your sack of flour, or they just need to eat you. And that's what happens. And what happens when the last survivors of the human race, being driven pell-mell by heat, just relentless heat, never stops, never let up. All it did was get worse and worse and travel north. What happens when the people learn how to just be brutal, just to murder for survival? Kill them, eat them. What happens? Then that's all they do. Every time they see another group of people, they kill them and they eat them until they're the last ones. And what are we talking about? 3, 4 people who have banded together, maybe a dozen, and they find that they're in the middle of the wilderness, knee deep in ocean water. They've gone as far north as they can, and there's nothing left to eat except each other. Now, I said before, the humans have gone through bottlenecks, genetic bottlenecks. We have no idea what humans were like before them because we lost all that information, had to start over. This is one of those. This is the genetic bottleneck. And whatever groups of people are left over at the far north, knee deep in the Arctic Ocean, and still looking for food, and maybe they're finding some seafood, but probably not, because it's been under ice, except for the last 20 years when all the ice melted. There's not much up there. It's not a teeming ocean like, the California coast or the eastern coast or the Gulf of Mexico with all the, with coral reefs and rich mangrove swamps and estuaries and all the things that you have to have sea life. None of that is up there because it's the north. It's always been under ice. There was nothing up there. Your walruses, other land animals, basically, that could eat the few shellfish and the crabs and the sea stars that existed in the area that could survive in that cold water. And so now you're up there and you're not a walrus, you're not equipped, and you're standing on the shore, knee deep in the water. And what are you going to eat? And there's a person to the left of you and there's a person to the right of you, and you have a choice. You can either try to work with these people or you can eat them. And some people are going to be real comfortable with the idea of just eating that guy. And so this is the narrative of how we go extinct, because we became completely trapped in modernity. And when it came time to break our bonds and start thinking differently, we couldn't. We didn't have time. No one told us we were going to have to do that. We never took the precautions against losing modernity. We just did our thing every single day. And one day we found ourselves surrounded by foreigners. And the next day the water wasn't working and there was no food at the supermarket. And we didn't know why. And no one talked about it. They never told us that there was a collapse coming. They never told us that modernity had become impossible because of global heating. No one told us anything. We're just doing our daily work, and then we get fired from our job, and then there's no gasoline at the service station, and there's no food on the shelves, and there's all these strange people, like, different skin colors and different dress and different eye colors, and they're walking up and down in front of my house, and they're all looking for food, and they're all looking for shelter, and now my tap isn't even working, and the electricity is intermittent, and I get out. That's it. You abandon it. You have no story. You have no story about what you're going to do. Oh, here's my plan B. Okay. This and this and this and this. And you never had that thought. Your plan B. Okay. All these things. You never had that thought because no one ever prepared you to think like that. So you didn't. And why would you? It's scary. It's ridiculous. It's science fiction. This is like zombie movie stuff. This is Hollywood. No, it's not Hollywood. It's science. It's global heating. You can't survive. And if you're in a place where you can survive, you're going to be overrun by people who are trying to survive. And when it comes your time to get out and try and survive, you're going to find that the northern half of the planet is ill prepared to receive you. And I don't mean just the people. I don't mean just the Swedes and the Canadians and the Laplanders, okay? And the Finns. I'm not talking about the people, although they will be ill prepared to receive you. They just don't have human habitat. They just don't. They barely grow their own crops. They have to import, crops from other parts of the world. A lot of these communities have been dependent on the sea. They're traditionally fishing communities. And if you go further enough north into like Alaska and Greenland, they're eating the whales and dolphins and seals. They get all their nutrition and all their everything, all their calories from the sea. Because it's too far north. You can't have crops. And there is no cropland, and there's no soil for crops. And finally, when you get into their area, they're looking at you like, where'd you come from? And you say, well, I'm here from Michigan, or I'm here from, Kenya. And we barely survive up here. We don't even grow crops. We don't even have farmland. What are you doing? What are you going to eat? You're going to eat whales like I eat? You're going to wear seal furs the way I eat? What is your story? You don't have a story here. And that's how it's going to end. Now, I said at the beginning, and that's the narrative. I can stop right there. Is that human extinction? Well, it doesn't have to be extinction. It could be a bottleneck. Maybe there's 5,000 people left, 5,000 humans left in the entire world. And the only reason that they're left is because those groups are so far separated that they can't eat each other. That's the story. They're somewhere around the Arctic Circle, which surrounds a sea, okay, an ocean. Somewhere around the Arctic Circle, there's enough scattered groups of people that they don't prey on each other. And given how much land that is, and how far apart they have to be to not be able to find each other, to kill each other and eat them, then you may have 2,500 people. What would that be? 100 groups of 25 people. 100 groups of 25 people spaced evenly around the Arctic Circle. 100 groups of 25 people, 2,500 people. That's it. And that's where we stop. That's where we stop dying. 100 groups of 25 people. Because if you're going to be a hunter-gatherer at the Arctic Circle, the size of your tribe can't be more than about 2 dozen. Because the habitat can't support more than about 2 dozen predators. Because that's what you're going to be, because there's no farmland. And you're not getting food from anywhere else. It's just the Arctic Circle. And it's peat bogs, and maybe you can find berries. And I mean, you're doing no better than bears at this point, okay? Maybe you're eating some salmon. Maybe you're finding some berries. Oh, and by the way, the bears are now competitors. and they're eating the salmon and they're eating the berries, and they're wondering what the fuck is these things, and they're going to try to eat you. And a lot of the times the bears will be successful eating the people until the people figure out how to fight and kill the bears, and then maybe the people kill all the bears, as we have done at other times in the past, killing all the big things and eating them. Or maybe we live in equilibrium with the bears and they keep to their part and we keep to our part, and once again, separation. And there's 2 dozen of you. And in some years, you have successful reproduction. Other years, because there's not enough food, or the females are sick, or but you're moving around too much, or there's been diseases, you don't have reproduction, and you have high infant mortality, and children are born and they die. And a woman might have a dozen or 18 children and actually end up with 2 that survive. Less replacement rate. If you have to have 18 children to have 2 children survive, you're barely surviving. And one disease comes through your group, and that group can be completely annihilated. Or another group finds this group and completely annihilates them. We call that, it's not extinction, we call that extirpation, right? A local extinction. And so your 100 groups of humans who are barely able to survive, competing with the wolves and the bears and trying to find something to eat, that's basically another animal because there's no farmland. Maybe you find berries like the bears do, and maybe you find some fish like the bears do, but mostly you're just kind of eating off the land and eating whatever you can run into. And pretty soon the 100 groups are of 25, or 50 groups of 25. And then it's 20 groups of 25. And now you're down to 1,000 individuals. You're down to 500 individuals. And does it stop there? Maybe it does. And it's been 50 years, right? I'm doing this in 2024. It's been 50 years. It's 2074. It's 2074. And there's 500 people left on the planet. And they're living far enough apart that they never run into each other. And they've lived long enough and they've had enough experiences that they know what can be eaten, where to find the berries, where to find the reindeer, where to find the seals, when do the salmon show up, how to catch the salmon. They figured all this out over time. And now they have a new story about how it's 2074. It's been 50 years. And they have a new story about what they're going to do. And there's probably not anyone left who remembers modernity. Nobody. And why would they talk about it? Maybe they'll tell some stories, how I used to live, but probably everybody who's alive in 2074 was born in the absence of modernity, and all they hear is myths about how things used to be. It'll sound to them like lives of the gods, right? Like how people used to think about the Greek gods or the Roman gods. Oh yeah, there's that whole life, that whole legendary thing. All those heroes and all those goddesses and all the wars they had, and it'll just be myth to these people in 2074, 50 years from now. And that's where we're headed. And everything I just said is just science and physics. I didn't make anything up. There was no alien invasion. There was no biblical plague. There was nothing. Those things could also happen. And we can even, somewhere in that narrative, we can squeeze in a nuclear war. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Too many people on your border, your troops are being overrun, use a couple of nukes. And the next country over says, what are you doing using nukes? Well, I had to protect my border. And then all of a sudden, they don't like that. And they're nuking you, or they're attacking you. And then you're nuking them back. And pretty soon all the nukes are flying, right? And what did I say in my last video? 1,000 nukes killing 1 million people apiece is 1,000 million people dead. That's 1 billion people. So you could lose 1 billion people 2 weeks. 1 billion people dead. And now you have a radioactive hellscape. And now you've blown modernity to rat shit for 1,000 cities, 1,000 regions. We can have that too. Not ruling that out. Not going to rule out a pandemic. Not going to rule out even just regular diseases that now we can't treat. And malaria would be a bad thing. Malaria really knock you down. But so are all the other diseases that kill people, including plague. We could have a plague, just good old-fashioned biblical plague, the Black Death. Good old-fashioned Yersinia pestis, but no antibiotics. And, the Black Death could kill 50% of a population or more. Some places it killed 80% of the population. So we can have that too. Maybe right after the nuclear exchange, right? And then the Black Death. And you say, oh, that's all science fiction. You're just full of shit. No, I'm not. We have no story about how not to have these things. So yes, as modernity collapses, yeah, sure, why not? Pile it on. A small scale nuclear war, 1,000 nukes. We got 12,000. 1,000 nukes is a small scale nuclear war. So why not? Let them fly, right? Get it out of your system. Could do that. Absolutely could do that. You might even say likely that would happen. Yeah, 1 billion people dead and a new, radioactive hellscape. All this is happening while people are trying to reinvent or reinforce or survive, the collapse of modernity. And then that happens. What does that do? People panic. People leave. They pack up the kids and the dog in the station wagon and they're headed north or they're headed east or they're going somewhere. And now they're on the road and now they can't find fuel and now they're walking. And where are they going? They don't even know. It just all happened so quickly. Modernity collapsed, left them high and dry. Like the tiger in the zoo when there's no one coming to the zoo. The tiger's by itself. The tiger's pretty well equipped to handle that. Tiger can get himself out of the zoo, find himself something to eat, and he's doing pretty good. Oh, and by the way, while you're trying to head north and you're trying to convince the Canadians to let you in, what if the animals are going crazy? The wolves are out, and even the tigers escaping from the fucking zoo. They're prowling the landscape looking for people. You could find yourself prey to fucking animals, predators, bears and wolves and escaped lions and tigers, for fuck's sake. Now here you are, no car, no gasoline, trying to get into Canada, and wolves are eating you and your children. How's this supposed to work? It doesn't work. And then there's nukes flying overhead every other day. Someone launches another nuke and blows up another city, blows up another bunch of people, sends people scattering into the world. Near-term human extinction. And that whole shit show I just described could take 10 years. Could take 5. Could take 5 years. It could start with too hot in India, those people split, too hot in Mexico, those people leave. Parts of Africa, you can't live there anymore. Those people leave. They get on the plane, they fly to Los Angeles, they fly to Las Vegas, and they start over. Pretty soon, there's all these people everywhere. No one's seen these people, and there's so many people, and the infrastructure is strained. And then also there's resentment, and the bullets start to fly, and now everybody's on the road because everyone's terrified of everybody else. And they're all headed north, and it's getting hot, and the heat is coming everywhere, and the infrastructure is failing. At 5 years, 3 years, the whole thing could fall apart. Whole circus act, the whole tent could come down in 3 years. No time at all. No time at all. Near-term human extinction. So there you go. I can stop right there. How do we not go extinct? Well, if we are small enough groups of people, separated from each other by enough space so that we never come in contact, then we can survive the diseases, we can survive each other, and we can start over. And if you're really far north trying to escape the heat, then probably you're just eating other animals. And provided that your group of people doesn't eat all the animals, then you don't starve. You become nomadic, and maybe you reinvent village life. I don't know. Maybe you do find some agricultural land. Maybe a bunch of trees burns down and the forest is cleared. And in 50 years, you can actually do some farming there. And so you remember agriculture, and you find wheat seeds, barley. I don't know, where's that going to come from? But somehow you figure it out, and you can reinvent agriculture, and you harvest the wheat and you grind the wheat somehow. And why would you even know to do that? Did you used to be a farmer? Do you still personally remember doing these things? If it's been 50 years, you may have no personal memory of any of this. You may have no idea that wheat is a thing, and that if you grind it, you can make it into bread somehow, right? With yeast. Where do you get that? I don't even know. But the last person who knew died of starvation 30 years ago. The last person who ever ate bread died of starvation 30 years ago. And now it's 2074 or 2064 or 2054. And, nobody knows how to do anything. All they do is just club other people to death and eat them. Club other animals to death and eat them. Hit them with a stick. Hit them with a rock. Near-term human extinction. And the complete modernity is gone. Modernity may be gone even back to the beginnings of agriculture. Fire. We may not have any of those things because we didn't know how to do those things without modernity, without matches. And you think you've got matches. Do you have enough matches for 50 years of being able to start fires from matches? Because we're talking about a long time. We're not talking about, 18 months of hiding out in the wilderness and then coming back to civilization. We're talking about civilization is gone. Modernity has collapsed because of global heating. Just couldn't keep it together. Global heating combined with all the refugee crises and the collapse of the food chains and the collapse of the technology chains and the collapse of all the services and the collapse of law and order and the collapse of cohesion and the collapse of hope, the collapse of faith, the collapse of everything. And people just couldn't figure it out. And 50 years later, do you think you have fire? Really? You think you're going to figure that out? Maybe if you have regular forest fires in your area, you can domesticate fire, but can you start fire? Do you know how to do that after 50 years of lacking modernity? Probably not. We may be literally further back than Stone Age people who had domesticated fire and could start fires and knew how to make stone tools. But they had accumulated that knowledge over 1,000,000 years. We could lose it in 3 years and never even know that people used to make tools out of stone. You don't know that. You don't know how they did it. Maybe you have a vague understanding of stone tools, but probably not even that. Not even that. It's all gone. And that's how you get, finally, the last humans on Earth. Now, extinction is the number 0, or no breeding pairs, 0 breeding pairs. So you can still have humans, but if they can't breed, then you're functionally extinct. So extinction is 0. Will we go to 0? No, we won't. But we might be a couple of thousand scattered around the Arctic Circle trying to figure out life, trying to survive the bears and the wolves. Yeah, a couple of thousand. And we've been there before. It's the record, the history of us going through a near die-off, well, a die-off and a near extinction. It's written in our DNA. So we could do that again, and we could come back from it. And who would we be when we did? I don't know. I just don't know. We won't have access to fossil fuels, and we won't have any, because they'll be gone, and we won't have any memory of anything that came before. Myths. That's it. And the people who survive the near-term near extinction, if they ever get around to traveling south and they leave the boreal forest behind and they leave the Arctic Circle and they'll probably be traveling on the coast because they've learned how to fish. So they'll be using the ocean for food, and they'll travel south on the oceans, right? And they'll come back into the bones of modernity. And they'll find the cities and they'll find the roads and the freeways, and they'll look and wonder because they will have never seen these things because they are now many generations removed from all that with no personal memories and probably very little mythology. And what will they think? And what languages will they speak? Will they speak any languages at all? And they'll come back. And will they start over? Will they live in the remains of our great cities? Will they wonder, to just stare open-eyed, just gobsmacked at what they find? The automobiles and the buildings and all the pipes and the concrete, flood control structures and the bridges and the ladders and the manhole covers into these weird caves, and all of it full of trees and bushes and deer, and they'll have no conceptualization of what they're looking at. None. They'll just be completely alien to them. Literally alien. They'll have no idea what any of this shit is. It's what's left over of modernity. And they'll have no idea what modernity was. Near-term human extinction. And you do get extinction if those people don't survive, if they can't figure it out. If they get as far north as the Arctic Sea and they can't figure it out and they go extinct, well, then we're done. And no one will ever see our great cities in ruins. And they'll never walk on the roadways full of grass and weeds and they'll never see it. Who knows if anyone will ever see it? We survived a great die-off at least once before, at least once, maybe more than once, but we wouldn't know. All we would have is evidence for the most recent one. And, we're probably going to have another one. And the reason that people talk about, the reason that people like me talk about near-term human extinction is because there it is. There it is. It's just written into physics. It's written by human behavior and our dependency on modernity and the constant 24/7 consumption of fossil fuels, leading to global heating that we just can't survive. And I'll say it right now, we may be there already. We may be looking at the opening days of this entire thing I've just described over the course of an hour. We may be there. And just as everything that I just described was inevitable, meaning there was no way out for anybody, it just one thing led to another. It's like the steps of extinction. It just one thing, like dominoes after another, and everything made sense. And everything was inevitable from the things before. And every step was impossible to avoid and inevitable. And it just kept going. And you just kept moving. And you were just surrounded by disaster. And everyone who was around you was surrounded by disaster. And you learn to survive, and you learn to mistrust, and you learn to kill, and you learn to devour. And you're like that tiger clawing its way out of the zoo, clawing its way across the urban landscape. And you may find yourself finally in the far north facing tigers that also figured it out. Tigers at the Arctic Circle. Near-term human extinction. Can we avoid this? I don't know. The only narrative I have is what I've been calling village life. And you may want to go back and watch some of my other videos. It's the point of village life. It almost seems like it's a waste of time. But the point of village life is that you can stay in one place. You could dig in now. And you could understand that you're vulnerable to the collapse of modernity, and you could just shed modernity, like a caterpillar emerging, like a butterfly emerging from the caterpillar. You could just say, okay, that was great, that was fun, but now I can't do that anymore. And you could just adopt another way of life. And if you could figure out a way to shed modernity and adopt something that's maybe partially modern, but definitely a group activity. And it's not you and the kids and the dog. It's a bunch of people trying to figure it out. And you dig a well, and you have wheat seeds, and you have land to plant them on. And you are currently aware of of the importance of electricity and plumbing and sanitation and making, flour out of wheat, and how to make bread, and how to cook, and how to, some vestiges of modernity that you can keep it going, but you can't do it alone. All you can do alone is flee ahead of the rolling disaster. But maybe if you're with a group of people and you've agreed to pull together, and you know what the challenges are, and you know what has to be done, and you all agree in advance that we're going to do this, or we're going to die, or we're going to have to leave, and then we're going to die. That once you're on the road, the chances of survival plummet to very close to zero. Most of those people will die. They won't find what they need on the road, partly because maybe it doesn't exist on the road. And the other thing is, there are people that got there first and ate it, drank it, wore it, took it, destroyed it. And by the time you get there, there's nothing left for you. So once you're on the road, you don't have much of a story. So you decide to reestablish village life, and you're going to be together, and you're going to figure it out if you can. And of course, as there's armies of refugees coming through your area where you've plunked yourself down, they're going to want in. And what's going to be your story? How are you going to keep them from coming in? What if they set your community on fire just to get your food, just to get you, just to get your women, just to get your children? They set your whole community on fire from a distance and wait until you go running out, and then they take what they want. That could be your story. You tried, you created a village, but there were so many people around you who didn't have any kind of a story. But wait, What if people take your example of village life and they say, "Oh, I could do that. You want to do that? How about we try what they're doing? Let's not take what they're doing. Let's not destroy what they're doing. Let's try to copy that." And maybe from this one example of village life that 100 people or 150 people pulled together at great expense and great effort, then maybe that becomes two villages, and maybe two villages becomes four, and pretty soon there's just a bunch of villages in your area and they're all somewhat self-sufficient. And they, some of them have electricity, some of them have water, some of them have grain stores, and you trade and you figure it out, you borrow best practices from each other, and pretty soon you've weathered the storm. And all the people who couldn't figure out village life are gone. They've died nearby. They went north, they went south, and they died headed south when they run into people headed north. And they've eaten all the food, and they've eaten each other, and all the predators have eaten them, and they've run out of water, and they got a disease, and they couldn't figure it out. They died. They vanished from the world forever. And your village and the village next to you, and maybe that one over there, you've kind of figured it out. And so you become what's left of humankind. But in that scenario, you don't lose everything. You've got electricity. Maybe you've got computers. Maybe you've got whatever else you could salvage. You learn how to, you have some machines, and you keep track of what you can do with machines. And you know how to recycle metals, and you do neat things with metals that's in your environment. And you just kind of keep going on. You've got tools. You've got, tools made out of steel that will last a long time. You can cut trees. You can make furniture. You've got it moving along. Village life. Maybe you could do that. Maybe people could do that. Maybe that's the answer. It's worth a try, I think. But when you're going to do that, most people never. They're just going to lose their nerve. They're just going to be freaked out. They're going to go to the tap, and the tap isn't going to work, and they're going to go to the store, and there's nothing on the shelves, and they're going to load the kids and the dog into the station wagon and head north. That's going to be their answer, because they couldn't think of anything else. Why couldn't they think of anything else? Be what? Because they're stupid? They were in denial? They were privileged? They thought money would save them, and it turns out money doesn't put water in the tap. Squeak, 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 right? Your money doesn't put food on the shelves at the market for you to spend your money. There's no shelves. There's no food on the shelves, and you got all this money, and that wasn't a good enough story. Being wealthy and privileged, and it didn't work, because being wealthy and privileged only works when you're embedded in modernity, where money and privilege have meaning. But once modernity has collapsed, your money, your influence, your political power, your privilege doesn't matter, because it only mattered in that one context, which is gone because of global heating. Now, maybe villages still have some notion of how these things work. Are you in a village? Did you bother making one? No, of course you didn't, because no one told you how to do that, or told you have to do that, and no one made an example of that. And you never saw that happening, and you never thought that was a problem. You were in denial. You were dumb. You didn't understand. No one told you. They just lied to you, and they never told you. And you never thought you had to do anything differently, so you didn't do anything differently. And then the day came when there was no water in the tap, and the shelves at the market had been empty for 2 days, and there's all these people going north on the street in front of you, and that's it. You're done. And you try to get up as much money as you can. You go to the bank, the ATM is closed, and you get all the money you can. And you get all your guns and your bullets, and you get an axe, but what are you going to do? You're going to try and get all that, plus your family, plus your food, plus some water, and the dog into a car, and you're going to leave. Now, how far do you get? Do you even get out of town? I think we have to adopt village life. I just don't think we have a choice. And when are we going to do that? Never. We're never going to do that. It's our only hope, is to create villages that are resilient and that can maintain some connection to modernity, the remnants of some knowledge that there was this modern world in which we were all embedded. And villages could do that. Modern villages created today, or tomorrow, the next year, could have that knowledge built in. But we're not going to do that, are we? We're not going to do that. So we're fucked. And not only will we lose 99.9999% of humanity, not only will we end up being 8,000 humans in the entire world, will have no connection to modernity. It just will be lost in the struggle to survive. Every child born will be a waste of time. Why teach them anything? Why tell them stories? Most of them won't survive past 3 years old. Why invest anything in a child? And by the time they're grown, the best thing you can hope for is they can help with the hunting and help with the reproduction. As soon as females are fertile, they need to start having babies because we're trying to maintain our population. Because hands help. The more hands, the better. And we lose people to diseases, and we lose them to predators. We lose them to fucking tigers now. We're up at the Arctic Circle, and there's fucking tigers. How'd that happen? Well, tigers have always been. As far as most people will be concerned, there will never be a time when there weren't tigers hunting humans because of all the zoos and all the tigers getting out of all the zoos and finding and being able to survive better than we do. And all they have to do is have their claws and teeth and find a mate. And when they find mates, then they eat people. They reproduce and they eat people. And tigers will do really well once they get out of the zoos. And the bears and the wolves will do really well. Maybe if you live in a village, you can have a fence and you can keep the animals out. And you'll have a story about how the animals got out of the zoos because you remember the zoos. And 50 years later, you're still telling your children, yeah, those tigers, they didn't used to be here. They got out of zoos. What's a zoo? Well, a zoo was where we had exotic animals. Back in modern times, we had exotic animals, and you could go to the zoo and buy a ticket and see the tiger in the tiger grotto. And then one day we couldn't keep the tigers in the zoo, and they all got out. And they all got out at the same time, and they all filled the world, and they found lots of things to eat, mostly humans. And that's why we have tigers now at the Arctic Circle. Isn't that amazing? Wow, that's a crazy story. Yeah, and I'm sure the tigers are doing well in other places, although except where there's too much global heating, they had to leave. The tigers moved north along with everybody else. They just followed the food. That was us. We were the food. So they followed us. And we went north, and they went north. And now we have tigers in Canada. Amazing story. So I guess that's all I have to say about how humans go extinct. Basically, it's everything all at once. But it starts with global heating, okay? And at this point, 2024, we can't stop it. We can't stop it. And everything I just outlined as a scenario is almost certainly going to happen. And maybe even village life will happen for some people in some places. I don't know, maybe. It's not up to me. I can talk about it. I can tell you. I can warn you. You got to do this. You got to figure out how to survive in groups that doesn't involve cannibalism. You're going to have to figure that out. You're going to have to figure out a way to keep yourself safe that doesn't involve bullets, because you're not going to have those. We're going to have spears, arrows, stone tools. I don't know. Figure it out. You're not going to have ammunition. You won't have anything of the kind. Maybe you start out with some, but it won't last. The problems are bigger than your armaments. And then what? So that's all I want to say about that. I could say more, but I think that about covers it. I would encourage you to go back and watch this video again. Watch it a couple of times. There's a lot that happens. And, if you want to go and jump into the comments and make some comments about what you think I got right or what I got wrong or what I left out, right? It could be even worse than what I'm imagining. If you think there's ways out of this, definitely leave a comment. I don't think there's a way out, to be honest. Just my perspective as a scientist and an engineer and a student of human behavior and modernity, I don't think there's any way out at this point. I think it's just inevitable. And the details will vary, and some places will do better than others. But how many of us are left in the end? Thousands? Separated by hundreds of miles? No connection, no roads, no communication, no nothing. Thousands of people separated spread around the Arctic Circle, eating whatever there is that grows there. Maybe, yeah, something like that. So I was going to do another video that basically explains the status of this channel, but I think I'll just do it here. I've been doing a lot of these videos, and I'll be honest, I don't think there's anything more to say. There isn't anything more to study. We understand global heating. We know it's not going to stop. There isn't any conversations taking place at any level of governance that they're serious about tackling this. So they're not going to. And honestly, there's no way they can. It's a wicked problem. If they stop burning fossil fuels, that's the end of modernity. And all of a sudden, 8,000 million people are trying to find a way to survive. And if they don't stop burning fossil fuels, that's also the end of modernity, because global heating just destroys everything, everyone, probably all at once. No food, no water, too hot, can't survive. Everyone's dying of heat. And, so either way, it's done. Either way, modernity is finished. Either we deliberately end it with a plan about how we're going to try and survive with the absence of modernity, trying to maintain as much technology and knowledge as we can, or we just pretend it's not a thing and take the uncontrolled demolition that, if you keep anything, if you keep anyone, if you keep any knowledge of the past, it's on accident. We could do it that way. And that's really what I just described, uncontrolled demolition. And a controlled demolition is virtually impossible. Nobody can have this conversation. You can't, I can't, nobody we're with, we can't have this conversation. And you need to be having this conversation of how to form a village with hundreds of people. I don't mean, your own family and maybe the next door neighbor and, maybe someone online on a messaging forum. That doesn't work. It has to be 100 people who live in your neighborhood. Is that going to happen? No, that is not going to happen. Can you make that happen? I doubt it. Will you ever find anyone who's willing to talk about village life with you? No, I don't think so. How does that even happen? How does 100 people who live near you all come to the same conclusion at the same time? How does that happen? When there are so many people in denial, so many people that are paranoid, so many people with mental illnesses, so many people that value their freedom, their personal freedom more than anything else, who fear communism, fear socialism, fear having their freedoms taken away, who deny everything. There can't be any problems. It's all a dark conspiracy. And how are you gonna form a village when that's what you're surrounded with? Because you are. You can't. So I don't see any point in me talking about this. I gave it my best shot. I really did. I feel like I did. And I put a lot of time into these videos. And, this one's already an hour and 40 minutes. I figured maybe I could do this in 40 minutes. It's hard to do it on a short time frame. It's really difficult. And it takes a lot of my time. It's frustrating. Spend so much time talking about something that no one cares about. No one will believe it. They'll never act on it. They'll never internalize it, ever. Not ever, for the history of ever. And then they're going to die. None of this will have mattered. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter. Everything I say here doesn't matter. Science doesn't matter. Physics doesn't matter. Reality, it just doesn't apply. You're all stuck in modernity because you're stuck there. You have no other story. And nothing I say here is going to change that. I can't save you. You can't save yourself. You can't get off this sinking Titanic. You are going down with the ship. There's nothing I can say to change that. There's nothing I can say to change that. Why am I even here? Why am I doing this? So I'm going to stop. And I think it's appropriate that at the end of this 3-part series about near-term human extinction, I basically leave the stage. I leave the stage. So let's end on that, shall we? Good luck. I really hope it works out for you. I really hope that you have help. I hope that the governments get their shit together. I hope the industrialists get their head out of their ass. I hope that they help you. I hope that they help you form villages and make sure you have the technology you need and bring you the resources you have to have and give you the teaching and give you the guidance and give you the counseling and whatever you have to form resilient villages and start living independently of modernity. I really hope someone does that for you. I've tried to do that in my way, in my tiny little limited human way. There's nothing I can do for you other than tell you that this has to be done. Will the governments do it for you? I don't think so. I want to see how they can. Nobody can talk about the end of modernity. They just can't, except me. Because I'm a fucking savage. I can talk about it. I just did. I just laid it out for you. Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to stop. I might come back. I don't know. Sometimes I get worked up about things, and want to vent. But, honestly, I think I've gotten it out of my system. You people are on your own. And some of this whole video thing I've been doing is me convincing myself that I'm right. Working it out in my mind. Is there any way out? And there isn't. There isn't a way out. So there's no need to discuss it further. So I don't think I'll be coming back. Everyone says that. Everyone changes their mind. They get back on Twitter. They get back on Facebook. But I'm tired. And it's been a long and difficult journey for me getting to this point. And I don't know. I don't see any reason to continue. I really don't. I just honestly don't. Intellectually, I just don't see a reason to continue. You should be thinking about these things. But I've said all I can say. And I don't know what to say now. See you on the other side.